Amendment to the
Reserve a
amendment.
point of order.
Point of order has been reserved.
Amendment to the amendment and the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Steube of Florida. Page 14, line 21, strike on and all that follows through line 25 and insert the following. 180 days after the date on which the Secretary submits a report to the Committee on the Judiciary of the House of Representatives on the effect that the Taliban overthrowing the legitimate government of Afghanistan and the high rate of illegal crossings on the southern border have on the national security of the United States, and the potential for an alien with ties to the Taliban or an associated terrorist organization to obtain a visa under this section. And
Mr. Steube, you are recognized for 5 minutes to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment addresses two major threats to our country brought on by the president's failure to properly execute his duties. Due to the Biden administration's mismanagement in Afghanistan and at the southern border, our country is significantly less safe today than it was 8 months ago when President Trump left office. Surges of illegal immigrants have rushed our southern border. Illegal alien apprehensions in June were over 178,000, which set a record, which was exceeded by the number in July, over 199,000, which is on pace to be exceeded by the number in August. Both the leaders of Mexico and Guatemala have blamed Biden for the crisis, and they are correct. This administration's actions has opened the floodgates to terrorists, gang members, and rapists. Meanwhile, President Biden chose not to follow President Trump's common sense condition-based withdrawal from Afghanistan and instead set an arbitrary deadline that resulted in disaster. President Biden said the Afghanistan withdrawal would be carried out, quote, responsibly, deliberately, and safely, and it was none of those. And now the country will again become a safe haven for radical Islamic terrorists. When asked about the situation, President Biden is reduced to hiding his head in his hands, as he did at a recent press conference. Congress needs answers, and the country needs answers. My amendment would address these issues by suspending the issuance of immigrant visas until the Biden administration can provide an accurate assessment of the national security risks to the country brought on by the disaster in Afghanistan and the withdrawal and the border crisis. I think the last thing that we want in the United States is the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS-K finding their way into this country. This amendment simply puts a parameter in place to allow the screening of these individuals so that doesn't occur. That is the amendment.
Madam
Does
Chair.
the gentleman yield back?
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Madam
Chair
Chair.
recognizes herself. The point of order has been withdrawn. The amendment
Thank
is germane. The amendment should be rejected. The actual impact of the amendment would be to postpone the tremendous economic benefit that will accrue to the United States through the investments that will be made through these proposals. There's no need to postpone the benefit of those investments. In fact, to the extent that there is any concern about visa entrance, all of the protections that are in place continue to be in place. They're not impacted whatsoever by the investments that are being proposed on the amendment that the matter that we are considering today. As we know, according to economists, in just 10 years, a path to permanent residence for these populations would increase the gross domestic product by a cumulative total of $1.5 trillion, would create more than 400,000 new jobs and boost wages for American workers while adding $148 billion after taxes to the U.S. economy. That's an important investment and an important benefit to the United States, and one that should not be postponed. So I urge that this amendment be opposed, and I yield back. Who else wishes to be heard on the amendment? Mr. Roy, I understand you wish to be heard.
I do, ma'am.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. First, let me applaud my colleague from Florida on this important amendment. I wholeheartedly support it. What we saw, what we continue to see unfolding in Afghanistan turns the stomach. This president has abandoned Americans, has left billions of dollars of assets for our enemies to use against us, has weakened our country, has weakened our standing around the world, and in my view, has, for this reason and many others, engaged in conduct worthy of impeachable inquiries or inquiries about impeachment. I believe that the president has weakened the United States. I believe the president has abandoned his duty to defend the United States. So I wholeheartedly support this amendment and appreciate my friend from Florida offering it. I would respond to the gentlelady from Texas. She invoked my name a few minutes ago, in which she tried to make certain comparisons of my position about how Texans and other Americans should respond to the president's unconstitutional, unlawful orders. She asked for me to clarify. Well, let me be perfectly clear. Americans do not follow the president of the United States' unconstitutional, unlawful orders. They are, in fact, unlawful. You should follow your conscience, talk to your doctor, make decisions that are in your best interest. If you are a small business, you should decide what is in your best interest. You should not bow down to the whims of tyranny coming out of the White House without any basis in the Constitution or law. So I don't want there to be any gray area. If my friend from Texas thinks that somehow I should be clarifying, I fully encourage the people of Texas to refuse to follow the order that President Biden put forth last week. Stand up for yourself, stand up for your health. Follow what you believe is correct for you. I think many people have gotten the vaccine. We're now at 75-ish% of adults having gotten one shot. We have now launched vaccines faster than in the history of our country and virtually any other illness. But now we've got the power of the government being used to strike fear in the hearts of Americans that they must follow an order without any basis in science. Listen to the Minister of Health in Israel, saying there is no basis for this passport. Just caught on hot mic. There is no basis for this vaccine passport other than to pressure people to get vaccinated. No basis in science. That's the reality. Why did we just have two folks resign from the FDA? Because they disagree with where the president's going with booster shots. Where's the discussion of dealing with people who have natural immunity, people who might want to have certain treatments or believe that it's in their best interest of them and their children? Conversations about the myocardial impact on young men. Studies just this week suggesting there's issues there. No. I stand up for healthcare freedom for Texans, for us to be able to decide what we're going to do, and I will not follow the orders of this president, standing up in Article 1 and standing up as a Texan with rights given to me by God. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there others who wish to be heard on this amendment? Mr. Tiffany, I understand you wish to be heard. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I support this amendment from the gentleman from Florida, and I wish that we were going through a legitimate visa process, and you see the last line in the amendment, an associated terrorist organization to obtain a visa under this section. As I have seen firsthand in our state of Wisconsin at Fort McCoy, they are not there on special immigration visas. So let's walk back about 3-4 weeks ago. We were hearing from the administration that people were coming here on special immigration visas. And if you look at the record, in the first 3 months of this year, 84% of the applications for special immigration visas were being rejected in Afghanistan. And remember, that's when they had a government that was still standing, that was not run by the Taliban. 84% were being rejected. Many of them took over a year for the review process to be decided whether they were legitimate. And I have been working with military members from my district to help people to be able to get into the United States that have a legitimate claim to be able to do that. But what we're seeing is that that special immigration visa process that was represented a month ago by the Biden administration, oh, don't worry, we're fully vetting people. I went to Fort McCoy a couple weeks ago with some of my colleagues, and we asked the question when there were 2,000 evacuees there at that point, are any of them here on special immigration visas? And we were stunned to find out, not one, zero. And I would bet with 13,000 there now, I would bet yet today there isn't any of them that have completed the special immigration visa process. They have all been waived in on parole authority by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And by the way, the commanding officer there, who is doing a fine job under extremely difficult circumstances in Fort McCoy, this thing being put together at the last minute in the haste of the Biden administration putting this together, said that our maximum capacity here, I'm recommending 10,000. As you just heard from me a few seconds ago, they're already up to 13,000 people at the base Fort McCoy in southwestern Wisconsin. So it's very clear what's going on here. People are unvetted. And the administration is circumventing the process of special immigration visas to make sure that people that are coming from the hotbed of terrorism in the world. I mean, this really isn't the same as some of the people coming across the southern border. I mean, this is the hotbed of terrorism. The Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda control Afghanistan. You don't think they want to embed people into these people that are being evacuated into America? You can bet that they're attempting to do that, and we're already seeing some cases. We're seeing communicable diseases being talked about on these bases. We had a rapist that was returned to this country after having been deported. We had someone that was caught by the German authorities coming out of Ramstein with blasting caps and ignition cords in his suitcase. Those things are already happening, plus the Europeans who were through the last major migration in 2015 that came out of the Middle East and Afghanistan, a number of those countries have said no. No, we cannot do this again because we have not been able to assimilate the people that came in 2015. Yet here we go, here in the United States, and they're just waving them through with this parole authority. There needs to be a stop that's done to this. There needs to be vetting that happens in third countries, safe third countries. That's where everyone should be held. And we've already seen the administration take a little bit of a pause. I don't know if they have stopped that pause as a result of people having communicable diseases. This is a disaster of epic proportions. And remember, this is a case where if we get just one person wrong, we've seen acts of terror on our soil now over the last couple decades. Do we see that happen again? We have to be extremely careful. Make sure we vet these people outside the United States and that they have a legitimate claim to come into our country. I believe what the gentleman from Florida has proposed here to protect our national security, both overseas and here in the United States, is appropriate. I hope everyone will vote for this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move strike last word.
You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the gentleman from Florida's amendment and want to associate myself with the comments from the gentleman from Wisconsin. I mean, think about this. The Taliban just took over. Terrorist organization now runs Afghanistan. We have a border wide open month after month after month, 6 months in a row, where the number of enforcement encounters has increased every single month to the tune of 212,000 in the month of July alone, 1.3 million this entire year. So the Taliban and terrorist organization just took over Afghanistan. We have a border that's wide open. We have tens of thousands of Afghans coming into this country, and we have an incompetent administration. Incompetent administration based on what we saw in Afghanistan, where 13 service members were killed, Americans left behind, allies left behind, and billions of dollars of equipment and weapons left behind. That is a combination that cries out for a pause, a timeout, and that is exactly what this amendment does. All it says is, hey, let's step back a second. We got a dangerous mix of facts here that could threaten the security of the American people. A terrorist organization running a country, a border wide open, and an incompetent administration. Maybe we should step back until we get things figured out. That seems like common sense to me. Seems like a darn good amendment. Seems like a darn good idea. I hope that the majority will accept this amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Bishop seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I likewise support this amendment, and I think it bears saying that circumstances have changed. You know, the 9/11 Commission, I was, as a fairly new member of Congress, I've read pieces of that before, I've undertaken to read all of it as we have just passed the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And of course, as all the experienced members on this committee know, the 9/11 Commission concluded that the catastrophic terrorist attacks on 9/11 resulted from the federal government's failure to respond, to prepare, to react appropriately to information that was well known to the federal government. The 9/11 Commission concluded that there was a failure of imagination, a failure to connect the dots about risks that were evident. Now, of late, and during my membership on this committee, this session of Congress, and on Homeland Security in the beginning and the last part of the last session, I've heard a number of times that the risk of jihadist terrorism against the homeland has receded. I've heard that from Director Wray of the FBI. I've heard it from Homeland Security. I've read it in the Homeland Security's threat assessment. I've heard it from experts in a briefing in Homeland Security just a week or so ago. And they've all said that that risk, the risk of international jihadist terrorism that has receded, has been replaced by a threat of terrorism from domestic white supremacists. I've pondered over that a good bit, and I've done a good bit of reading about it, and what they must mean, it seems to me, is that the risk of catastrophic terrorism in the homeland is over. That the risk of spectacular attacks like the hijacking of 4 jets and ramming them into buildings and so forth that we saw on 9/11 is now displaced by risks like the horrendous attacks on the Tree of Life Synagogue, the El Paso Walmart, Dylan Roof's attack in the church in South Carolina, even Oklahoma City going back to Timothy McVeigh. And of course, the most killed in any of those attacks, albeit extraordinarily tragic and horrendous and contemptible, was about 135 people, I think. So what we're being told as we sit in these committees as members of Congress is that the risks have receded of domestic terrorism. But to the gentleman's point in making this amendment, the gentleman from Florida, circumstances have changed. Due to the most incompetent management imaginable of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we've seen suicide bombs there, killing 13 service members who were sitting ducks at gates to the airport. An absolute, unbelievable dereliction of responsibility by the president and his team in managing that withdrawal. Bringing back all at once a successfully operated significant attack, terrorist attack. And at the same time, I mean, this is part of the circumstance that has changed. At this very same moment, the administration has decided to completely abandon control of the southwestern border, so that you have, on a sustained basis now for months, enormous amounts of illegal immigration, all the encounters. And we hear all the time that there are thousands of gotaways, thousands of people who are depleted and overtaxed border agents no longer have an opportunity to interdict at all. If those two new circumstances do not tell the federal government it is time to reevaluate, then I'm afraid of what it might be that would bring home that lesson. And so the gentleman's amendment undertakes exactly that. It's a calling on the federal government, on this Congress, to wake up to the change in circumstances. And so it ought easily to be supported by everyone who doesn't want to have on his or her hands the consequences of failing to act in the face of changed circumstances. And I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose is gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I would seek unanimous consent to place in the record an article by Forbes, Dreamers and Legal Immigration Changes, an article from UC Davis, Citizenship for Undocumented Immigrants Would Boost the U.S. Economic Growth, an article, Immigration Facts and the Positive Economic Impact on Immigration, an article, Room to Grow, an article from the New American Economy, Immigrants Contribute More in Private Insurance Premiums than they receive in benefits, and finally, a report, Keeping Medicare Solvent, How Immigrants Subsidize Medicare's Trust Fund for All U.S. Seniors. I'd ask unanimous consent.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Without objection. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does Mr. Biggs seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the Steube amendment. I'm intrigued that what he's asking for doesn't seem particularly onerous, but I know that it's going to be defeated. The hurry that we see from the other side is interesting. On page 14, they want this provision to take place on the earlier of the date, within 180 days after the date, or at least by May 1st, 2022. They really want to get this in and get it going, yet at the same time, we have two crises that have erupted, one that's been ongoing now for a good number of months, and another one that just has taken place. I associate myself to the comments of Representative Tiffany and Bishop and the sponsor, Mr. Steube. Right now, the reporting is that there are literally thousands of special interest visa people that are on the ground in Afghanistan that were not allowed in. And most of the people that have been let in did not have special interest visas, nor were they American citizens, nor were they permanent residents, aliens, or have some other legal status to be here. And what I found intriguing about that is when Secretary Blinken was at a press conference, and he talked about the triple threat or the three levels of vetting that they are doing. But when queried about what happens to those who are disqualified, he walked off the stage without answering the question. We're not sure what they're doing. We know what we think they may be doing, but we do not know. And that opens us up to potential national security threats. This is an important amendment because it calls upon the Homeland Secretary to get some information for us so we know what the impacts have been and what they will be. I will just give you a little information that is now about 3.5 months old. And one of the many times I've been down to the border this year, and actually on 2 different occasions down at the border, I asked about people coming through on that they've apprehended on terrorist watch list. As of 3.5 months ago, we'd apprehended 2 times the number that we normally do. The highest ever, actually, is what they said. Twice the highest level ever of people on the terrorist watch list. Now, when you think about that and how porous our border is, and you understand that right now what's happening is many individuals are coming to Mexico on tourist visas and then moving up to the border and then crossing, you understand how important it is when you counting 300,000 total people a month coming across, whether it's the apprehensions, the known gotaways, and the unknown gotaways. About 300,000 a month, more than twice as many as the highest ever on the terrorist watch list. And you have about anywhere from 70 to 100,000 people a month. We simply do not know who they are or where they're coming from or what their business is in the United States of America. How can you rush the implementation of your amnesty bill until you understand what has been going on and the impacts of an open border and unvetted Afghani refugees coming into the United States may be? I don't understand how you can say that you support the security and integrity of this nation and can still oppose the Steube Amendment. I support the Steube Amendment, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition on this amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Who's that?
Mr. Bentz.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask for inclusion in the record the article, Yes, Immigration Hurts American Workers, dated October 2016. And it calls out, and I raise this issue in light of the remarks made regarding this particular amendment. And what's being said, of course, is that a careful, considered immigration policy, well-balanced, to take into account those in America who are going to lose their jobs as a result of
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent to insert this in the record?
Yes.
Without objection.
Thank you. And if I may continue, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And so going back, this article calls out the challenge of getting immigration policy right. And this amendment talks about the delay until we get our understanding of the impact of who might be coming across the border right. And it has been mentioned that we're going to have an incredible economic benefit from immigration, and that is partially true, if you get immigration right. And the challenge, of course, is to make sure that those who are going to be harmed by immigration, because people in the lower level of our income structure are going to lose their jobs when we bring in, or at least make legal 9 million people and welcome in others, as is the case now. And so the real challenge today is how in the world do we slow this process down so we can get immigration right? Because this approach is not doing that. It's not taking into account the damage that will be done, as this article calls out, to those who will lose their job by virtue of those that are being legalized by this process. So I really could not stand or sit idly by and allow the remark to be made by these economists, and I've looked at those articles also, about how great immigration is going to be for our economy. Yes, it will be great for some, particularly those who immigrate, because they are coming from places where their wages are extraordinarily low. So of course they want to come here. Who can blame them? But the point I'm making is that this is not going to be a policy that is carefully thought out, and it should be, and it deserves that kind of attention. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The
I would ask for an
recorded vote is requested. Recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren?
No.
Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no.
I guess I was winning, but that's all they had on, right? Didn't have shoes, didn't have socks, didn't have a shirt on.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Body was just, covered.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Someone should be muted.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass?
Bass votes no.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu?
No.
Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal?
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Dimmings?
No.
Ms. Dimmings votes no. Mr. Correa?
No.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Garcia? Or sorry, Ms. Garcia.
Garcia votes no.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse?
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath?
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross?
Ross votes no.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush?
Bush votes no.
Ms. Bush votes no. Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat?
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert?
Aye.
Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Issa?
Aye.
Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck?
Aye.
Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates?
Aye.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock?
Aye.
Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Steube?
Yes.
Mr. Steube votes yes. Mr. Tiffany?
Aye.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey?
Massey votes aye.
Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy?
Aye.
Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Bishop?
Aye.
Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach?
Fishback votes aye.
Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts?
Arts, yes.
Ms. Sparts votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald?
Aye.
Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz?
Yes.
Mr. Benz votes yes. Mr. Owens?
Aye.
Mr. Owens votes aye.
Could you tell me how I've been recorded? Scanlon.
Ms. Scanlon, you are not recorded.
Scanlon votes no.
Ms. Scanlon votes no.
How is Swalwell recorded?
Johnson, how am I recorded?
Mr. Johnson of Georgia, you are not recorded.
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no.
David Cicilline, how am I recorded?
Mr. Cicilline, you are not recorded.
I vote no.
Mr. Cicilline votes no.
Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no.
How is Ms. Ross recorded?
Ms. Ross, you're recorded as no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 19 ayes and 23 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Mr. Fitzgerald, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment at the desk.
I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. The